Chapter 85. The first party to volunteer was Bassone's group. Basone himself was a burly fighter with a shaved head, the kind of man who looked like he relied on grit more than finesse. At his side stood Gomez, a sorcerer draped in a black robe, his eyes sharp and calculating. 4 others filled out their ranks, competent enough, I supposed, but nothing particularly memorable. A standard 6-person party. They stepped forward confidently, earning a polite round of applause. Next party to take up challenge was. We'll take the challenge. The voice cut cleanly through the murmur of the crowd. 3 figures leapt up from their seats and strode forward with unmistakable confidence. For a split second, I frowned, and then my eyes widened. Wait, is that Ellen? Sure enough, there she was, leading the charge with her usual fearless grin. Her 2 companions flanked her just as I remembered, Cobble and Guido, perfectly in sync, moving with the ease of a veteran team. I hadn't expected this at all. I'd tasked Ellen's trio with assisting in the founding of Yome's new nation, having them travel between free guild branches in the former Farmus territory. As a B-ranked, no, B-plus ranked, adventuring party, they were more than capable, and their ability to cross national borders without restriction made them ideal for the job. They hadn't accompanied Yome to Tempest, so I'd assumed they'd returned home or taken on other work. It never once crossed my mind that they'd show up here as dungeon challengers. They must have been hiding it so Archduke Errol didn't stop them. I thought I'd just heard Archduke Errol screaming from one of the adjoining rooms, only for it to cut off abruptly, followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy smashing into something else. Yeah, I could picture it perfectly. Errol had probably realized what Ellen was about to do and rushed in to stop her, only to get a solid, no-nonsense punch to the stomach from El-chan before he could even finish voicing his objections. That would explain the sudden silence. Hopefully, Ellen would be finished with the dungeon demonstration before her father woke back up. Of course, once he did, there was no escaping the aftermath. Errol would definitely scold her, and Cobble and Guido too, without mercy. He was far too doting for his own good, always fussing over her, always meddling, always doing things that thoroughly embarrassed her in public. Honestly, no wonder Ellen couldn't stand it. Still, that was their family business. Unlike Errol, I was far more mature. And so, I decided, with great dignity, that this was absolutely none of my concern. The next group stepped forward, only 3 people this time. Wait, wah, I started to say. Thud, GHK. A sharp, focused impact drove straight into my stomach. Ack, a very undemon lord-like, extremely undignified sound escaped my throat as I doubled over slightly, clutching my abdomen. Ow. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head. Seal sat beside me, posture perfectly composed, one fist still raised, undeniable proof of her crime. Why? I demanded, still holding my stomach. This is my first time attending an event as your officially acknowledged wife-to-be, she said coolly. Her mask hid her expression, but I could clearly imagine the deadpan stare boring into me. Do not ruin it, she continued without mercy, and it is only a labyrinth tour. Let the children enjoy themselves. If you act like an overbearing, doting parent, they will resent you. That hit harder than the punch. I froze, the words lodging straight into my heart. Slowly, I nodded, thoroughly chastened. So this is what Archduke Errol felt like earlier. For the first time, I understood him completely. Accepting Ciel's warning, I kept my mouth firmly shut and turned my attention back to the stage. 3 parties were already standing there. First was Bassone's group, Basone himself at the front, broad-shouldered and confident, with Gomez the robed sorcerer beside him and 4 other adventurers filling out the formation. Solid, dependable, a textbook first challenger. Next stood Ellen's party. Ellen herself looked as sharp and composed as ever, her presence alone radiating the assurance of a seasoned B-plus adventurer. Cobble and Guido flanked her, both grinning like this was a festival outing rather than a dangerous dungeon crawl. Judging by their expressions, Archduke Errol's wrath was the least of their concerns right now. And then, I felt my stomach tighten, this time not from a punch. The third party consisted of 3 figures I knew all too well. Shizu, Katarina, Shinsha, all 3 stood in their adult forms, calm and radiant, drawing murmurs from the audience the moment people realized who they were. Shizu's gentle composure, Shinsha's quiet confidence, and Katarina's barely restrained energy formed a strange but unmistakably powerful trio. So much for letting the kids enjoy it. Before I could dwell on it any further, Soka's voice rose again, and with it came the arrival of our 4th party. Led by none other than Masayuki, the so-called hero of the day. They strode onto the stage with practiced ease, smiling and waving as if they were already used to this kind of attention. Ma, sa, you, ki, ma sa you ki. Yes, yes, all right. They definitely hear you. The applause was thunderous, almost shaking the hall itself. Masayuki responded with an awkward but earnest grin, the kind that somehow only made the crowd cheer louder. What a stud. Including Masayuki, the party numbered 4. Jinrai stood out immediately, not least because he was no longer half naked. He wore the mithril armor I'd given him earlier, a full suit crafted by Garmin rated rare. It was heavier than Yome's exo armor and lacked some of its mobility, but its durability was unquestionable, and the built-in anti-poison enchantments made it excellent for dungeon exploration. All in all, a well-balanced team. We set a 3-hour time limit, calculated carefully to ensure no one pushed beyond floor 5 today. Masayuki's group held a clear advantage thanks to the map I'd provided, and that was intentional. I was counting on them to serve as living advertisements for the labyrinth, heroes bravely challenging the unknown, making steady progress, and returning safely. If all went well, today's spectacle would spark curiosity, ambition, and no small amount of envy. But just as I was about to move the show along, wait, I'll join in, too. A man clad entirely in black stepped onto the stage, his presence cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Gai the flowing swordsman. Ah, him. I completely ignored the stream of gibberish he followed that declaration with. From the looks of it, Gai intended to challenge the labyrinth alone. Honestly, that worried me. Not because he was weak, far from it, but because the dungeon was not designed with solo challengers in mind. Coordination, adaptability, and teamwork were all part of the trial. That said, having real data on how a lone adventurer would fare could be extremely valuable. This could actually be useful. If nothing else, Gai would provide us with a perfect reference point, how much pressure the labyrinth exerted on a single, highly skilled combatant without support. That made our lineup complete. Basone's 6-man group, Ellen's B+ ranked trio, Shizu, Katarina, and Shinsha, Masayuki's hero party, and finally, Gai, the lone challenger. With all participants decided, the air grew taut with anticipation. Conversations quieted, eyes fixed on the stage. The long-awaited moment had arrived. It was time to open the dungeon. There wasn't much time to spare, so all 4 parties would be entering the dungeon simultaneously. Soka would remain here in the hall, providing live commentary as the action unfolded on the large screen. As for guidance inside the labyrinth, we entrusted that role to the dryads. They would also act as our cameramen, accompanying each party and relaying live footage back to us. We didn't have many available, but among them were Trainee, Treya, and Dorith. The remaining dryads were still young and lacked combat experience, but they possessed tremendous magical power. Under Ramirez's supervision, they were more than capable, perfect, even, as labyrinth staff. Soka went on to carefully explain the rules to the audience, including the function of the resurrection bracelets. Soka also made a point of emphasizing one crucial detail to everyone present. The resurrection bracelets only function inside the labyrinth. Outside of it, there would be no safety net. Anyway, that wrapped up the initial briefing. All that remained was a live demonstration of the resurrection bracelet. There was still visible hesitation among the audience. No matter how many explanations we gave, trusting a miracle of resurrection wasn't something people could do easily with words alone. Sensing this, Mjalmile decided to take the initiative. Without a shred of hesitation, he slipped on a resurrection bracelet and stepped into the labyrinth. Soka drew the sword at her hip, raising it high as if to strike Mjalmile down herself for the demonstration, but before she could bring it down, Gai abruptly cut in. For a brief moment, I was sorely tempted to step in and kill him on the spot, but I restrained myself. The result, however, was exactly as expected. The moment Mjalmile was struck down inside the labyrinth, the resurrection bracelet activated, and in a flash of light, he was restored, standing whole and unharmed once more. The arena exploded into cheers. It's a miracle, he came back to life. So it's real. Voices overlapped in disbelief and awe as excitement rippled through the crowd. The demonstration had done its job perfectly. Seeing was believing, after all, and with that single act, most of the doubts melted away. If anyone still refused to believe after this, well, they'd just have to experience it for themselves. The dungeon is now open for exploration. A brand new world awaits within. What trials, what wonders lie ahead for those bold enough to fight their way to the very bottom? Soka's voice rang out as she officially kicked off the commentary. At the same time, the massive screen lit up, splitting neatly into 5 separate views, each one showing the perspective of a different party as they stepped into the labyrinth. The live connections were flawless. Gasps rippled through the audience as the scenery shifted from the familiar arena to the alien, otherworldly corridors of the dungeon. Stone walls etched with magic, branching paths stretching into darkness, faintly glowing sigils embedded into the floors, it was all projected with startling clarity. Soka adopted a documentary-style tone for her announcing, calmly narrating each group's movements, pointing out environmental details, traps, and subtle design choices rather than simply hyping every step. I found myself genuinely appreciating her professionalism. It helped the audience understand that this wasn't just a spectacle but a carefully constructed world. On screen, the 5 parties cautiously set off in different directions, their journeys beginning in earnest. The first party that caught my eye was Bassone's. If I had to describe what I was seeing in a single phrase, it would be recklessly complacent. They weren't exploring so much as wandering. No, one was drawing a map. No chalk marks on the walls, no symbols, no attempt to track turns or junctions. Instead, they were chatting casually as they strolled down the corridors, laughing as if this were a sightseeing tour rather than an unknown labyrinth. And, unsurprisingly, they got lost. I had deliberately designed the first floor to be safe. No monsters, no lethal hazards, just a maze. The idea was to ease challengers in, teach them caution, awareness, and the importance of preparation. At least, that was how it was supposed to go. But watching Bassone's party, I could already tell, at the rate they were going, even this beginner floor was going to be brutal for them. I was just starting to worry when the floor beneath them vanished. A hidden trapdoor snapped open, and before any of them could even shout, the entire group dropped out of sight. They had landed on the second floor. I stared at the image, genuinely taken aback. That trap wasn't supposed to activate until much deeper in the labyrinth. It wasn't even meant to exist on the first floor. After that, I immediately grilled Romulus. And by grilled, I mean properly interrogated. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Apparently, she thought I had forgotten to add trapdoors to the upper floors and decided to fix it herself. When I pressed her further, asking if there were any other things she might have done without telling me, things only got worse. It turned out Ellen had given Romulus a large number of cakes. Not just any cakes, either, these were baked by Mr. Yoshida himself. And honestly, I couldn't even argue with their effectiveness. If Yoshida made them, they were guaranteed to be incredible. Worse still, Ellen had pulled the same trick on the dryads. Bit by bit, pastry by pastry, she had coaxed information out of them about the first floor's layout. Romulus did eventually realize what was going on, but as she put it, the magic of those pastries was simply irresistible. Yeah, I could see that happening. At that point, everything clicked into place. No wonder Ellen's group was performing so well. They hadn't just come prepared, they'd come pre-informed. I let out a long, tired sigh. Fine, I'll let it go. For now, this wasn't something to blow up in the middle of the festival anyway. Still, bribery, especially with sweets, was a serious loophole in our management system. I made a mental note to discuss this with Ren later. I was absolutely certain she would take care of it. After that, things proceeded smoothly. Soka and Mjalmile continued explaining the labyrinth's functions in detail while the parties pressed onward, their progress displayed clearly on the screen. Ellen's party, unsurprisingly, made excellent use of the information they had acquired. Their movements were efficient and deliberate, avoiding unnecessary detours as if they already knew where to go, which, irritatingly enough, they did. Bassone's party, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. They were still tackling the dungeon blind, blundering forward without any real plan. No mapping, no markers, just brute persistence and vague optimism. And somehow they managed to trigger every trap along the way. It was honestly painful to watch. My daughters, however, were a different story altogether. Shizu, Kat, and Shinsha approached the labyrinth exactly as it was meant to be challenged. They carefully mapped their surroundings, deliberately avoided trapdoors, and rotated roles without a single word wasted. Their coordination was flawless, each one covering the other's blind spots, and, perhaps most importantly, they actually looked like they were enjoying themselves. Watching them, I felt an odd mix of pride and mild anxiety. They were very good. Then there was Masayuki's party. Somehow, they had triggered nearly every trapdoor they came across, almost as if they were aiming for them on purpose. And yet, despite that, they were making incredible progress. In less than 30 minutes, they had already reached the 4th floor. I stared at the screen in disbelief. What kind of luck even was that? That left only Guy. Unlike the others, he wasn't bothering with caution or clever routing at all. He was simply tearing through the labyrinth using his physical prowess, sprinting at full speed through corridors and obstacles alike. Delta was flying flat out just to keep up with him, barely managing to track his movements. Ellipsis ellipsis. Ellipsis ellipsis. By the time 2 full hours had passed, the situation had begun to diverge even more clearly between the parties. Basone's group had just stumbled upon yet another hidden room. Watching the feed, I couldn't help but nod in approval. Finding those without prior knowledge wasn't easy. Inside, they engaged a group of monsters and, after a tough but steady fight, emerged victorious. Their reward was a silver chest. Silver chests weren't bad at all. The top-tier rewards included high-grade potions, ancient gold coins, quality armor, and other valuable gear. And starting from floor 2, there was even a very small chance of pulling a rare level item. That tiny chance had just paid off. When the chest opened, the blade that emerged immediately caught everyone's attention, a rare grade sword. The excitement on Basone's party's faces was palpable, and honestly, they'd earned it the hard way. Meanwhile, Ellen's party had already moved on to something far more decisive. They entered an area boss chamber, where a swarm of giant bats descended upon them. The fight was efficient and well coordinated, clearly planned in advance. Once the last monster fell, they found a gold chest in chamber. With their objective completed for the day, Ellen's party didn't linger for even a moment. They immediately began preparations to withdraw from the labyrinth. No greed, no unnecessary risks. It was a cold, calculated approach. Secure your gains and leave before things can turn against you. As for Masayuki's team, my daughters, and Gai, they were all drilling deeper and deeper into the labyrinth, almost like it had turned into a foot race. Even so, it was becoming increasingly obvious who held the advantage. Masayuki's party was in the lead. By the time the 2-hour mark rolled around, they had already reached the 9th floor, putting them well ahead of the rest. Close behind were my daughters, though their priorities were noticeably different. Rather than rushing downward or hunting for treasure, they focused almost entirely on combat. Whenever they encountered a monster, they took turns stepping forward, treating each battle as a game. Their coordination was flawless, and more importantly, they were clearly enjoying themselves. Masayuki's group, on the other hand, tore through floor 9 at a blistering pace. With more than 50 minutes still remaining, thanks to yet another conveniently placed trapdoor, they dropped straight into the deeper section of floor 10, ending up dangerously close to the boss chamber. Masayuki's absurd luck was on full display yet again. Of course it was. At this depth, the labyrinth no longer confined monsters to rooms alone. Enemies now appeared directly within the corridors, sometimes in small groups, forcing parties to stay alert at all times. Even so, Masayuki's companions handled the situation impressively. Nearly every monster they encountered fell in a single blow, and at no point did they appear to be in any real danger. Since my map remained accurate, aside from the cursed trapdoors, they continued consulting it carefully, double-checking routes as they advanced. Finally, the party reached the final chamber of the floor. The stairs leading to floor 11 would only appear once the boss lurking inside was defeated, a black spider, rated B rank in difficulty. The moment it emerged, an oppressive silence fell over the room. Yeah, that scream lasted longer than the fight itself. Jinrai stepped forward and cleaved the spider in two with a single slash. That was it. Damn it, that was genuinely frustrating. Against Team Masayuki, a B rank black spider didn't even qualify as a speed bump. If it weren't for all those accursed trapdoors, they would have at least been forced to spend more time reaching this point. Instead, they'd practically been dropped at the boss's doorstep. As if to rub salt in the wound, the party calmly collected their gold treasure chest, pulling out a rare level dagger as the reward. They even registered their names at the floor's save point. Watching that, I made a decision. Right then and there, I will abolish every single one of those trapdoors in the labyrinth. Once the boss was slain, Masayuki's group wasted no time. They activated their return whistle and were instantly transported back to the surface, becoming the second party to emerge, right after Ellen's team. But just as they vanished, the door to the boss chamber opened again. Stepping inside were my daughters. They took one look at the empty chamber, and the faint lingering mana of a battle that had ended moments ago. Ah, all three of them sighed in perfect sync. The disappointment was obvious. They'd clearly been looking forward to fighting the floor boss themselves. Still, it didn't linger long, none of them were truly upset. More like mildly annoyed that they'd been beaten to the punch. Guess we were a little late, Shizu muttered. They exchanged glances, shrugged, and decided they'd done enough for today. Reaching for their return whistle, they prepared to head back as well. And then, the door opened again. PFF'd. That piece of garbage swordsman beat me here, Oh well, bring back that boss for me. Guy spat the words out without even sparing my daughters a glance, as if they were part of the scenery. I resisted the urge to sigh. The labyrinth's rules were simple. Bosses and gold chests resurrected roughly 30 minutes after being defeated. Everyone participating had been informed of that ahead of time. Unfortunately for Guy, only 15 minutes remained out of the 3-hour allotment. When the explanation was relayed to him, he didn't take it well. Are you kidding me? He snapped. You think you can boss me around in here? I know how talentless all you people are, but I don't see why I need to stoop down to your level. Get this boss back here now. Ah, there it was. The greed in his eyes was unmistakable, raw, ugly, and completely unrestrained. He wasn't disappointed he missed the fight, he was furious he missed the reward. Delta, hovering nearby as his assigned guide, took the abuse in stride, her expression remaining neutral. But then, HMPH, the master of a talentless fool is a talentless fool. There's no need at all for me to abide by the rules of you buffoons. The air shifted. My daughters stopped reaching for their return whistles. Slowly, very slowly, they turned around. No smiles, no irritation, just quiet, absolute stillness. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto Guy. Kat was the first to step in. Hey, she said, forcing her tone to stay light, almost friendly. She even put on a small smile, one that anyone who knew her would recognize as very deliberate. The boss is already defeated. It'll revive in about half an hour. There isn't much time left, so why don't you come back when the labyrinth officially opens? It was the perfect response. Calm, reasonable, by the book. Last time Kat had lost her temper with Guy, Shizu had scolded her afterward, quietly but firmly. Kat clearly remembered that lesson. She swallowed her irritation and did everything right. Unfortunately, Guy was not the kind of man who rewarded restraint. Shut up, you cheating bitch. He barked, spinning toward her, eyes blazing. Don't order me around. Stay out of it. Kat froze, not in fear, but in shock. For half a heartbeat, she just stared at him. Then, Shinsha moved. She stepped forward and planted herself squarely in front of Kat, hands tucked casually into the pockets of her skirt. Her head tilted down just enough that she had to glare up at Guy, crimson eyes sharp and unblinking. Oi, her voice was low, rough, entirely inappropriate for someone who looked like her. Don't talk to my lil sis like that. She took one deliberate step closer. You got some nerve, Shinsha continued, lips curling. Barkin' like a big shot after she went outta her way to be nice to you. Another step, spewin' that kinda crap right in front of her, her grin sharpened, dangerous and feral. You lookin' for trouble? I pinched the bridge of my nose. Why is she talking like a back alley delinquent? Shinsha leaned forward slightly now, eyes locked onto Gaia's. Let me make this real clear. That's my sister. Each word landed like a hammer. You don't get to yell at her. You don't get to insult her. And you definitely don't get to walk away like nothing happened. She cracked her knuckles, slow and deliberate. So here's how this goes. You apologize. Real nice. A brief pause. Or I knock that smug look clean off your face and personally drag your sorry ass back to the surface. Guy stared at her for a moment, then scoffed, disbelief twisting his face. TCH. You're kidding me, right? You think a runt like you can defeat me? Shinsha smiled. It wasn't cheerful, it wasn't playful. Oh, she said lightly, rolling her shoulders, you're real lucky this place has rules. Delta took a step forward. Her gaze locked onto Guy with a cold, unblinking intensity. It is time to close the labyrinth, she said flatly. The boss will not be resurrected. Please return to the surface now. I will no longer overlook this behavior. Guy snorted, looking down at her with open contempt. What? And who decided you get to talk down to me? You're just a guide. Don't make me laugh. Delta didn't blink. Clear rule violation confirmed, she said calmly. Executing punishment. Huh, Guy scoffed. Punishment. And what exactly do you think you can? Vines exploded from the stone floor. They wrapped around his arms, legs, torso, tightening in an instant and yanking him off the ground. Gaia's body was lifted helplessly into the air. Wah! His voice cracked as he struggled. Delta raised one hand slightly. I have disabled the pain suppression function on your resurrection bracelet, she informed him. Do you feel inclined to apologize now? Thin thorns erupted from the vines, slipping precisely into the gaps between his armor plates. GHK. The scream tore out of him, raw and uncontrolled. Blood welled where the thorns pierced flesh, every movement sending fresh agony through his body. This was Thornbind, high-grade spirit magic. And Delta had cast it with zero delay. Damn you. Guy spat through clenched teeth. You think this is enough to beat me? Delta tilted her head slightly. This is your final warning, she said. Do you wish to apologize? TCH, like hell I do. He snarled. This level of magic could never. The sentence never finished. Delta stepped forward and, with a smooth, almost gentle motion, drew her hand across the air. His head fell. The vines loosened, releasing the body as it collapsed to the floor, already dissolving into light. As the resurrection bracelet activated, silence fell over the chamber. The sight of Guy, the flowing swordsman who had dazzled the crowd during the battle tournament, being utterly destroyed by the gentle-looking Delta drew an audible gasp from the audience. No flashy exchange, no desperate struggle, just instant, absolute defeat. Guy may have believed himself strong, but he had been killed before he could even mount a defense. Seeing that moment magnified on the massive projection screen was enough to chill the room. Several nobles visibly stiffened, a few adventurers swallowed hard. Moments later, the screen smoothly switched perspectives to Bassone's party. Mjalmile and Soka resumed commentary, calmly explaining the penalties for violating labyrinth rules and the absolute authority of its administrators. I wasn't listening. Shouldn't Guy be back on the surface by now? I muttered under my breath. Romulus fluttered nervously beside me. Well, actually, Cat just asked me to resurrect Guy on that same floor again. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. Then I looked at Seal. She didn't need words. She understood immediately. Romulus, she said evenly, please grant me permission to interact with your intrinsic skill, Mazecraft. Romulus blinked. Once. Then twice. She looked at Seal. Then at me. Then back at Seal again. I mean, that's fine and all, Romulus said hesitantly, scratching her cheek, but, are you sure you can handle it? There's a lot of information in there. Even I can't fully process everything. I usually just dump it out of my head after I'm done building the place. Don't worry, I replied casually. Seal can handle it. That was all Romulus needed to hear. Well, all right, she said, nodding decisively. I'll give her the right to intrude into my Mazecraft skill. Romulus reached out and placed her tiny hand against Seal, and with that, Seal instantly had access to the labyrinth and by extension me. Moments later, I could see Guy. Not through the projection screen, but directly inside my mind. It was as though a screen had been placed right in front of my eyes. Guy had been resurrected exactly where Romulus had placed him. Standing before him were my daughters. Kat stepped forward first, her expression bright, almost cheerful. Well then, she said lightly, twin swords resting at her sides, time for your punishment. This scene, at least, wasn't being broadcast to the audience. That alone explained the subtle shift in their posture. No need for restraint, no need for appearances. They could deal with him properly. Kat tilted her head. Since the boss won't be resurrecting for a while, how about you fight me instead? Guy scoffed, rolling his shoulders. TCH, that guide just caught me off guard. You really think you can beat me without cheating like last time? Kat's smile didn't waver. She raised her twin blades into position. Let's see. The battle began. What followed couldn't honestly be called a fight. It was torture. Kat didn't overpower him with brute force. She dismantled him, piece by piece, strike by strike. Every movement was deliberate, precise, cruel in its restraint. She avoided fatal blows, carving away his confidence first, then his mobility, then his dignity. There was no pain suppression. Every strike landed exactly where it would hurt most. Only at the very end did she grant him mercy. With a single, clean cut. I turned my gaze away. The moment my focus shifted, the image vanished, replaced by the distant sound of Mjalmile and Soka continuing their commentary as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. I forced myself to listen. And somewhere deep down, I found myself offering a silent prayer. Not for Gaia's pride, but for his safety. As soon as the official demonstration ended, the challengers were lined up on stage once more. All of them, except Gai. According to Soka, he had been transported directly to the infirmary. She very conveniently explained it as the result of severe rule violations within the labyrinth, making no mention whatsoever of my daughter thoroughly enjoying herself a little too much. I decided to ignore Gaia's fate entirely. Stepping forward, I faced the challengers, microphone in hand, ready to deliver the closing remarks. So, I asked, smiling at them, what did you think? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Did you have fun today? Our dungeon will be officially opening to the public in just a few more days. I promise you, it's perfectly safe. So if any of you are interested, feel free to give it a try. I paused, then added with a grin. And if anyone manages to conquer the 100th floor at the very bottom, I will personally grant you the right to challenge me to battle. The crowd erupted. With that, the event came to a close, and my instincts told me we'd absolutely nailed it. The tournament finals had been thrilling, sure, but watching these live test runs through the labyrinth made it feel as though you were really inside it alongside the challengers. The tension, the surprises, the danger, it all translated beautifully. All in all, it was the perfect way to round out the show. Of course, it would have been perfect if the show had actually ended there. But then, Rimuru, what is the matter? I have yet to see a single challenger. How long do you expect me to wait? Veldora, the so-called Lord of the Labyrinth, sent me a thought communication that made it painfully clear he hadn't listened to a single word I'd said. Way to ruin the moment. Didn't I tell you, you're not going to see anyone good enough to reach the bottom for a while? What? That is not how I understood it at all. Then you understood it wrong. Why don't you try actually listening to me for once, brother? We went back and forth like that for a bit, an utterly pointless argument that left me feeling more tired than annoyed. With a quiet sigh, I opened another thought communication. Shizu, if you're still feeling up for a fight, could you go play with Veldora for a while? There was a brief pause. Yes, Kat and Shinsha would definitely enjoy that. We'll head there now. Yeah, I figured as much. With that thought communication cut off. Ellipsis ellipsis. Ellipsis ellipsis. It was the final night of the festival, and to bring everything to a close, we hosted a massive banquet. Shuna and Mr. Yoshida were operating at full throttle, sparing absolutely no expense as they prepared the most extravagant spread yet. If there was one thing I was determined to do, it was to make sure everyone left Tempest with the best possible impression. As I looked around the hall, I noticed something that made me smile. Nobles who had once kept to themselves were now chatting freely, laughing together like old friends. Over the course of the past week, they'd formed connections, some political, some personal, and the stiff tension that had filled the room on the first night was nowhere to be found. The atmosphere was warm, relaxed, and genuinely festive. At the same time, I knew that elsewhere, things were lively in their own ways. Deep within the labyrinth, Veldora was undoubtedly having the time of his life sparring with the kids, probably roaring about how this is what he'd been waiting for, while getting more exercise than he'd admit to later. Ramirez and Milam, meanwhile, were enjoying their own brand of chaos in the labyrinth alongside Caroline, Frey, and Midray. Trainee and the other elves were working tirelessly to keep that entire group fed, entertained, and, most importantly, contained. Out in town, visiting merchants, adventurers, nearby farmers, and Tempest's own residents all shared food and drink together as equals. Every bar and restaurant had opened its doors for free, letting people drink, sing, and celebrate as much as they pleased. Here, too, people let their guards down. Human or monster, it didn't seem to matter as the night went on. Music filled the streets, singers matched their voices to the rhythm, and dancers moved without a care for who was watching. Laughter echoed from every corner. In a way, it hurt to think that this moment would eventually end. It felt wasteful, almost cruel. Starting tomorrow, everyone would return to their old lives and familiar responsibilities. The thought left a faint heaviness in my chest. And yet, that was precisely what made all of this worth it. It was a strange feeling, one I suspected I wasn't alone in experiencing. Still, no matter where I looked, people were smiling. Truly smiling. They were living in the moment, savoring it while it lasted. Perhaps that was happiness. As I watched these scenes unfold, I quietly wished that this peace, this simple, shared joy, could last for a long, long time. And so, the night wore on. Ellipsis ellipsis ellipsis. Ellipsis ellipsis. Ellipsis. Too cruelly, the festival came to an end. Since early morning, the highways had been packed with people heading home. The security team, led by Rigyur in Gobta's absence, had been hard at work since before sunrise. Thanks to their efforts, even our VIP guests were able to begin their return journeys without any major issues. Fortunately, the highways were wide enough that traffic flowed smoothly, so long as no wagon broke down and blocked the road. Some visitors even chose to remain in town for a few extra days, waiting for the rush to thin out. Because of that, I didn't expect many complaints. With the highways left safely under Rigur's supervision, I turned back to my own responsibilities. First on today's agenda was paying out those gold coins. More than 100 merchants were already seated in the main meeting hall, waiting. Rigurd and Mjalmile were keeping order and explaining the situation in my stead, but it was about time I made my appearance. This was going to be a critical moment, and I knew I had to nail it. Arriving at the meeting hall, I could already hear people arguing from the outside. I told you, everybody is going to be paid today, so please stay calm and wait just a bit longer. You think you can trick us like that? I waited for you until the end of the festival. Hurry up and just pay me my due. Whoa, I certainly understand your concerns, but can you show some deference to us, please? Yes. Are you intending to drag our names through the mud for introducing you to our friend Mjalmile? No, sir, we're not. All we want is for what's owed to us to be rightfully paid. And that's why I'm telling you to be patient. This nation isn't going anywhere, and they said they can pay everyone right now in anything besides dwarven gold coins. Can you help us out a little and hold on until things are cleared up? A likely story. Yeah, come on, pay up. It sounded like some of Molly's merchant friends were trying to smooth things over with the tradesmen we owed money to. Maybe this was just how they operated as merchants, but I couldn't have been happier to see it. It proved that Molly really was a good judge of character. Not wishing to delay matters any further, I stepped forward. Diablo opened the doors wide. Era, I said softly as I entered, my voice calm and perfectly measured. From the tone of the room, it would seem some manner of complication has arisen, one that I ought to be made aware of. I advanced with unhurried grace, my steps light yet commanding, the atmosphere shifting the moment I crossed the threshold. At my back stood Ren, poised and immaculate as ever. Behind her followed Benimaru and Xian, their presence alone enough to steady the room. Diablo entered last, silently closing the doors behind us, sealing the space, and everyone within it, under my attention. The murmuring in the hall died instantly. Good. The merchants visibly stiffened the moment they saw me. My words alone had drained the color from several faces. They must have assumed I would keep my distance and leave everything to Rigurd and the others, but instead, I had appeared in person, my full retinue in tow. They clearly had no idea how to respond. The demon Lord Rimuru has entered, Rigurd announced sharply, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. Bow your heads. A handful of merchants hastily rose to their feet, scrambling into deep bows. Most, however, remained seated, staring at me with poorly concealed confusion and unease. There's no need for such formality, Rigurd, I said gently, a soft smile gracing my lips as my eyes traveled across the hall. Rigurd inclined his head and stepped back in silence. Only then did I notice them, faces that didn't quite belong. Journalists, poorly disguised among the merchants. Of course, they were here to witness everything firsthand, ready to spread word of Tempest's conduct to the world. If we faltered, it would become a scandal overnight. If I fell to my knees and tearfully admitted we couldn't pay, they'd call us incompetent. If I threatened or coerced the merchants into silence, we'd be branded tyrants. But we were already ahead of them. One journalist, far more loyal to our side, had quietly tipped Diablo off beforehand. I turned my gaze toward Molly, my expression calm, voice low and unhurried. Pray tell, I said softly, each word measured and serene. What is the source of this commotion I sensed upon entering? The noise carried quite far, enough to disturb even this hall. The pressure in the room subtly shifted. Well, Demon Lord Rimuru, a noble-looking man spoke up, rising from his seat with an exaggerated flourish. I trust you are in good health. It is regrettable that we have not had the pleasure of making each other's acquaintance until now. I regarded him for a moment, then tilted my head ever so slightly, graceful, curious, and unmistakably dismissive. And you are? I asked, tone polite yet distant, as though the answer were of only passing interest. Of course, I knew exactly who he was. But Ren had been clear, acknowledging him would only inflate his ego. So I played my part perfectly, my expression serene, my posture regal, my ignorance absolute. It was clear to me, he was no one worth remembering. Seeing that I hadn't even recognized him, the man let out an awkward, slightly forced laugh. Behind me, Ren stepped forward with effortless grace, her posture flawless as she spoke. This gentleman, she said evenly, is Duke Musei of the Kingdom of Gaston. Musei smiled, clearly relieved to finally be acknowledged, even if indirectly. Oh, is that so? I replied, my lips curving into a soft, courteous smile. How enlightening. I inclined my head just a fraction, as though considering something mildly curious. Still, I continued calmly, from what I understand, today's gathering concerns Mjalmile's settlement of accounts with the merchants. A purely commercial matter. My gaze rested on him, gentle, unpressured, yet inescapable. So I find myself wondering, for what reason would a duke deem it necessary to attend such a meeting? Ren drew breath to respond, but Musei raised a hand and spoke first. Ren, reading the room perfectly, stepped back without a word. Well, you see, Musei began, adopting a tone of practiced authority, there are several tradesmen present who are conducting business with your nation for the first time, having come here specifically for this festival. These individuals approached me, claiming that their legitimate rights were neglected. He spread his hands, as though burdened by responsibility. It is the duty of the nobility to safeguard their citizens. And while I regret the bluntness of my intrusion, I have come here today to mediate this matter. His words echoed through the hall. I listened without interruption, still smiling. I see, I said softly, my voice smooth and unhurried. And yet, that is rather peculiar. I turned my gaze toward Molly, my expression thoughtful rather than accusatory. You assured me that our budget was more than sufficient. If payments are still being delayed, then I must ask, what is the cause? Molly stiffened slightly. He had only been meant to serve as a figurehead here, and now found himself unexpectedly in the spotlight. He began meekly, wiping at his brow, the issue is that these merchants will only accept payment in dwarven gold coins. Before he could elaborate further, Duke Musei smoothly cut in. Surely that should come as no surprise, Mjalmile, he said, his tone calm and indulgent. A reputable merchant of Blumen such as yourself must be well versed in international commercial law. He glanced around the room, carefully including the gathered merchants in his address. Unlike the rather informal practices of the Free Guild, these traders conduct business strictly in dwarven gold. It is the only currency they can place their trust in. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he appear aggressive. He spoke as though patiently correcting a misunderstanding, positioning himself as a reasonable mediator, a benevolent third party acting purely out of duty. I watched him quietly. Yes, this was exactly what he wanted. He was waiting for the moment I would turn to him for assistance, so the Tempest would owe Duke Musei of Gaston a favor. A very expensive favor. But, Lady Rimuru, Benimaru said evenly, I cannot help but wonder. They may not be dwarven coins, yet we do possess ancient gold coins. And should those still prove unsatisfactory, we could easily offer Tempest-made goods of equivalent value. Why, then, are they unwilling to accept such terms? I inclined my head slightly in agreement, my expression serene. Indeed, I share your sentiment, though, I added gently, I am certain the merchants have their reasons. My eyes drifted back to Duke Musei, not challengingly, not accusingly, merely observant. As expected, he looked ready to speak. I could almost see it. The practiced rhetoric, the appeal to reason, the moment where he would rally the room and corner me beneath the guise of fairness. So I spoke first. In that case, I continued smoothly, how about this? If coinage is truly the only concern, then perhaps you might place your trust in our nation. I gestured lightly with one hand, as though offering something rather than demanding it. As Benimaru suggested, we can provide goods of equivalent value, or, if preferred, formal IOUs guaranteed by me and the nation of Tempest. My smile remained gentle. Would that not suffice? I don't believe a word of it. Why yeah, this is a nation of monsters. That is precisely why we require payment in reliable, trustworthy dwarven gold coins. I trust you will understand, and be generous in your. The voices overlapped, rising and falling in uneven waves. Some were crude, others carefully measured, but none of them spared even a glance in my direction. Veteran merchants are wide-eyed newcomers, it made little difference, every word was spoken as though I were not present at all. Then Duke Musei stepped forward, his smile polished and indulgent, like a man offering charity rather than asking for it. How about this, Lady Rimuru? He said smoothly. If you find yourself in something of a financial bind, perhaps you might discuss the matter with me privately. Fate may have brought us together here for a reason. If I could be of service too. I appreciate the offer, I said calmly, cutting him off mid-sentence, but it will not be necessary. The room fell silent. Please, I continued, turning slightly toward the entrance, my voice gentle yet unmistakably commanding. Come in. The doors behind us opened at my signal. Following my order, Geld lumbered into the hall. He carried a massive tray held effortlessly, piled high with gold coins that gleamed warmly beneath the hall's lights. Wah, no way, is all of that? A ripple ran through the room. Whispers broke out, then died just as quickly, swallowed by disbelief. The instant Duke Musée laid eyes on the coins, the color drained from his face. It was subtle, but unmistakable. In that moment, I knew he understood. His carefully arranged stage had collapsed. You were seeking payment, were you not? I asked, my smile gentle, almost kind. Very well, here it is, payment in full. All in dwarven gold coins. Silence. Not a breath, not a shuffle of feet. You could have heard a pin drop. Wah, please wait. Just a moment, Lady Rimuru. Duke Musée blurted out, his composure finally cracking. Now you wish to speak? Yes, I replied coolly, my tone stripping away any remaining warmth. Are these truly dwarven gold coins? He demanded, desperation twisting his features. Counterfeit currency is a grave crime, one that violates international law. Ren stepped forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her eyes were cold, utterly devoid of warmth, as they fixed upon Duke Musée. Duke Musée, she said evenly, her voice calm yet edged with steel. Are you accusing my lady, the sovereign ruler of this nation, of circulating counterfeit currency? A brief pause. You would do well to choose your words carefully, Ren continued. Such an accusation could very easily ignite an international incident. I beg your pardon. Musée stammered, breaking into a cold sweat. I meant no offense. I merely wished to confirm that this is truly. If you doubt them, I interjected smoothly, turning my gaze upon him with a serene smile, then you are free to have them appraised. My tone left no room for refusal. In that case, a merchant suddenly spoke up, hastily stepping forward, if you will excuse me, I possess reliable magical instruments suited for examining currency. I can verify their authenticity at once. Ordinarily, interrupting a conversation between a duke and a demon lord would be unthinkable. But today, I let it pass. From the way Duke Musée avoided my eyes, it was clear enough. This man was one of his, whether a protégé or a conspirator hardly mattered. The disruption had shaken him badly enough that he'd forgotten even the most basic etiquette. Just then, Lady Rimuru, Shuna, after receiving my thought communication, spoke to me from behind the closed door, precisely on cue. The reporters you mentioned are waiting outside. They say they wish to document the outcome of these negotiations. How shall we proceed? Excellent timing. The journalists had already been gathered beyond the doors at Diablo's instruction. All that remained was my signal, at which point they would enter, witnesses to every word spoken and every conclusion reached. Then, precisely as planned, the doors to the meeting hall opened, and the reporters filed inside. They're real, the shaken merchant, one of Duke Musé's collaborators, cried out, his voice cracking. Naturally they were. Indeed, one of the reporters said, adjusting his spectacles as he examined the coins with clear fascination. And not merely authentic, these are remarkable specimens. Some of these coins are exceedingly old. Several may never have entered general circulation at all. So those must be the ones El Chan traded with me. I inclined my head slightly, my expression serene. Then I trust this matter is now resolved, I said, my voice calm and dignified, carrying effortlessly through the hall. Our merchants' concerns were solely regarding payment. Since their doubts have been laid to rest, proceed to settle the accounts in full. Yes, my lady, Riegert and Molly replied in unison. They immediately stepped forward, producing neatly prepared ledgers, contracts, and receipts. Under the unblinking gaze of the reporters, the payments were processed one by one, methodically, flawlessly, leaving no room for misinterpretation or dispute. And you would be the last, Molly said once the final documents were stamped and signed. Silence followed. With that, the final piece of business from the Founders' Festival was complete. Ha, ha ha ha, Duke Musée let out a strained laugh, his posture rigid, sweat beading faintly at his temple. Truly impressive, Lady Rimuru. I cannot begin to imagine how you managed to assemble such a vast quantity of dwarven gold. In the midst of the rising murmurs, the merchant I had already marked as a colluder cleared his throat and spoke up. Well, in that case, Lady Rimuru, since international law has been upheld, we have no further complaints. We would be honored to continue doing business with your nation in the future. That will not be necessary. My reply was soft, too soft. The effect, however, was immediate. The merchants froze, eyes widening in unison. My own staff stiffened behind me, Benimaru's brow twitched, Xian blinked in disbelief, and even Rigard hesitated. Only Diablo smiled faintly, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. Ren, as ever, stood with perfect composure, her expression serene and untouchable, as if this outcome had been decided long before anyone else entered the room. What do you mean by that? Someone stammered. Our business with you is concluded, I continued calmly, as though explaining the most self-evident truth in the world. There will be no further transactions. I don't understand. What is the meaning of this? If you have paid us properly, surely that proves we can trust one another. Are you looking down on us, simple tradesmen? Do you have any idea how difficult it is for nations to trade without traveling merchants? The room erupted into overlapping voices, panic creeping into their tones as realization slowly dawned. Looking down on you, I repeated softly, tilting my head just a fraction. You are mistaken. A quiet pause followed. You were the ones who insisted, again and again, that you could not trust our nation, were you not? I folded my hands lightly in front of me, my tone even, almost gentle. Trust is not something demanded. It is something shared. It is a two-way street. My gaze moved slowly across the room, meeting their eyes one by one. I do not believe trust means one party meekly accepting every condition the other imposes upon it. Several merchants shifted uncomfortably. Mjalmile here asked you, politely, and on multiple occasions, to place your faith in us. Did he not? But, their voices faltered. I know what you were thinking, I continued, unhurried. We are monsters. We seek trade with the Western nations. And you wondered whether we could truly abide by human laws, human customs, human rules. Why yes, exactly, one of them blurted out. That is why, and that, I said, cutting him off smoothly, is precisely why we offered you alternatives. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Barter through goods of equivalent value, or payment via ancient gold coins, currencies that predate modern borders and political influence alike. Silence. You rejected every proposal. Their faces stiffened. You dismissed each compromise outright. Quote exclamation mark quote. And now, I concluded quietly, my voice calm yet final. You stand before me and ask why I have chosen not to place my trust in you. You wish to do business only with those you can trust, I said softly. A perfectly reasonable stance. I allowed a small, composed smile to form. And you know what? So do we. The room went still. We will conduct trade only with those who place their trust in us, as equals. My gaze sharpened, though my tone never rose. Therefore, I will not permit any of you present to conduct commercial activities within our nation. Murmurs rippled through the hall. I am not barring your entry into Tempest, I continued calmly. You may visit freely, but do not expect licenses, contracts, or protection for trade from this day forward. Only then did the gravity of my words seem to land. This was a new market, one poised to reshape the balance of commerce, and they had just been excluded from it. Duke Musse's face drained of color. I will not tolerate such tyranny. He shouted, composure finally breaking. These people were merely demanding their rightful protections under international law. Tyranny, I echoed, smiling with effortless grace. I believe you are mistaken, Duke Musse. Allow me to correct that misunderstanding. I took a single step forward, the room silent enough to hear breath drawn. To begin with, our nation is not yet a member of the Council of the West. As such, we are under no obligation to abide by its regulations. His lips parted, but no sound came. More importantly, I continued, my voice serene, trust cannot exist where it is demanded by only one side. I met his gaze directly now. We are free to choose our trading partners. And we do not place our faith in those who refuse to place theirs in us. A pause. You have already made your position clear. I inclined my head slightly. And so have I. Duke Musse opened his mouth to speak again. I stepped forward first. Lowering my voice so only he could hear, I said softly. Enough, Duke Musse. You've already lost your footing here. Then I stepped back, as if nothing of consequence had occurred. His face twisted, humiliation plain for all to see, while the merchants around him began to fidget, panic creeping into their expressions. Any illusion of unity they had brought with them was already crumbling. The reporters, meanwhile, were clearly enjoying themselves far more than they had expected. Quills scratched rapidly across parchment as they recorded every detail, free to savor the spectacle without bearing any of its consequences. I turned away from Duke Musei. "You may handle the remainder," I said evenly. "I would be honored, Lady Rimuru," Molly replied at once. As I passed him, I gave his shoulder a light, reassuring pat and murmured, "Thank you, Molly." With that, I exited the hall alongside my staff, leaving the aftermath, and Duke Musei's unraveling, behind. To be continued.